Russia, 1762. A young woman is imprisoned in a tower room. She's just given birth to a stillborn child, and her husband, the new emperor, is convinced she's a failure as a woman and a potential threat as an empress. He spends his time having affairs with other women, throwing gold coins out of his bedroom window to enjoy the sight of commoners fighting over the riches. The young empress watches all of this from her room in the tower, plotting her revenge. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to meet Catherine the Great. Viewer discretion is advised for this episode because it contains some violence and mature themes. Our story begins in the opulent world of pre-revolutionary Russia, where power struggles and courtly intrigue were as common as tea and caviar. Our protagonist is Catherine Alexeyeva, a 19-year-old German princess who would soon become the most powerful woman in Russia. Catherine arrived in Russia in 1759 to marry the heir to the Russian throne, Peter. She was a smart and educated woman, but she was also naive and somewhat spoiled. You see, Catherine grew up in the courts of Prussia and Saxony, surrounded by luxury and privilege. Her mother had made sure of that. The problem was that Russia wasn't like those German states. It was huge and sparsely populated, and the people of Russia were largely uneducated and poor. So when Catherine entered the Russian imperial court, she found herself in a culture shock. Despite their shared German heritage, Catherine and Peter didn't get along at all. Peter was a cruel and sadistic man who liked to play mind games with the young princess. To make matters worse, he openly kept mistresses and prostituted his wife, Catherine, in taverns and brothels. Although she did everything she could to please him, Peter constantly humiliated her. It didn't help that the two didn't speak German, but instead used French and Russian when they talked, which both sounded quite harsh to Catherine's ears. But perhaps what frustrated Peter the most was that Catherine hadn't given him any heirs, and so he began to believe that she was frigid and unable to bear children. However, Catherine's inability to produce an heir wasn't actually her fault. Peter was infertile. When Catherine turned 19 and still hadn't produced a Russian heir, Peter became desperate. So he decided to take a mistress, one that would definitely get pregnant. Enter Leshy, a 16-year-old peasant girl whom Peter took under his wing. While Peter may have thought he was being clever, hiding Leshy away in a palace near the main residence and giving her lavish gifts, Catherine was none the wiser. And if she didn't know already, she soon would. Soon after, Leshy gave birth to a baby boy, Alexei. Catherine had no idea that Peter was cheating on her with the lowly peasant girl. And even if she did, there was nothing she could do about it. After all, she was just a German princess in a strange land. If she tried to defy her husband, she might be sent back to Germany without a penny to her name. But Catherine had another advantage too, one that Peter hadn't anticipated. Catherine and Leshy's son, Alexei, got along very well. Even though he was a bastard, Alexei was still the apple of Catherine's eye, and she raised him as if he were her own son. In fact, it was Catherine who taught Alexei how to read, write, and think critically, and she made sure that he received the best education possible. Seeing how much Alexei loved Catherine and vice versa, Peter became even more suspicious of his wife. He had no idea that she was raising his illegitimate son in her chambers. But he sensed that she was hiding something, that there was some sort of plot brewing behind closed doors. And he was right. For years, Catherine plotted her revenge against her husband. She learned the language of the people, studied Russian history, and wrote down her ideas for improving the country. In addition, she spent hours every day exercising so that she would be fit and strong enough to escape if necessary. But Catherine knew that escaping wouldn't be easy. There was no hope of fleeing to Germany. She couldn't go west to Poland, Ukraine, or the Baltic states because Peter would simply declare war on them. So her only hope was to the south, to the Black Sea coast, where the Russian nobles kept their ships. In order to escape, Catherine needed allies, and she found them in the most unlikely of places, the serfs and peasants. You see, despite all the luxuries she enjoyed, Catherine had witnessed firsthand the horrible conditions that many Russians lived in. She had seen the extreme poverty and the terrible working conditions. And she had met the brave and intelligent Russian people who dreamed of a better future for themselves and their children. Catherine listened to their stories and she believed them. She truly wanted to help improve the lives of the Russian people, and she knew that she had to get rid of Peter first. So Catherine's plan was put into action. The first step was to lure Peter far away from St. Petersburg. And Catherine managed to do this by claiming she was sick and needed to spend some time alone. Once Peter was gone, Catherine's allies moved into action. Soldiers loyal to Catherine seized key government buildings, while others rode out into the countryside to capture Peter's estates. Meanwhile, Catherine assembled a group of nobles and officers and told them that she had taken control of the government. She declared that she was now Empress and that Peter was deposed. The nobles and officers pledged their loyalty to her, and together they marched on the palace where Peter was staying. It was then that Peter realized he'd been betrayed by his own wife. He tried to flee to Finland, but Catherine's forces caught up with him and forced him back to Russia. They brought him to the city of Ropsha, where they locked him up in a small wooden house. Catherine then invited Peter to meet with her one last time before he was exiled to Siberia. But really, she just wanted to make sure he was alive and well. In addition, she wanted to gloat about her victory and show him what a good leader she was. Catherine's advisors had prepared a banquet fit for a king, and the former emperor was seated at the head of the table. When Peter arrived, though, he noticed that his seat was right next to a large fireplace. Catherine offered to warm him up, but we all know fireplaces are hot, and Peter was already sweating bullets. Catherine went on and on about how she was going to reform Russia, about how she was going to liberate the serfs and improve their working conditions. And all the while she kept glancing at Peter to see how he felt. Finally, when she was done talking, she ordered the servants to light the fire. Poor Peter was burned alive as Catherine watched with amusement. After securing her power, Catherine wasted no time in putting her plans for Russia into action. She reformed the government, modernized the army, and encouraged trade and industry. She also freed the serfs from some of the worst abuses of the nobility, although they remained enslaved. Perhaps Catherine's greatest accomplishment was her expansion of the Russian Empire. She added Poland, Crimea, Azerbaijan, and Georgia to Russia, making it one of the largest empires in the world. Under Catherine's rule, Russia became a major player on the European stage. She was respected by her peers and feared by her enemies. One of Catherine's most famous lovers, Grigory Orlov, said this about her: "Her mind was so vigorous, her penetration so extraordinary, her knowledge so extensive, her memory so tenacious, that she knew how to make every moment of her life useful." Another lover, the poet and playwright Nikolai Rimsky, once wrote to a friend, "The Empress possesses remarkable abilities. She reads everything and remembers everything. She has a quick and ready wit and speaks 5 languages. She has a prodigious memory. She knows how to listen and knows how to keep a secret." In addition, Catherine was a patron of the arts and sciences. She founded the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Hermitage Museum, and she was a prolific writer herself, publishing works on history, literature, and philosophy. As you can imagine, Catherine's rise to power and accomplishments made her many enemies, including her own son Alexei, who hated her for deposing his father. But Catherine was never afraid to use her power to protect herself. She had her enemies exiled or executed depending on what they did. And she kept a close watch on her son, Alexei, to make sure he didn't get out of hand. Sadly, Alexei would die in mysterious circumstances before he could do anything to challenge his mother. Catherine the Great ruled Russia for 34 years. When she died in 1796, she left behind a legacy that would inspire generations of Russians. She was a strong and intelligent ruler who helped to transform Russia into a major power. She was also a woman ahead of her time, a woman who defied the expectations of society and achieved greatness on her own terms. But don't forget, it was all just a game to her. In reality, Catherine was just as ruthless and power-hungry as her husband, Peter. She simply knew how to hide it better. Now it's time to make your voice heard. What did you think about Catherine the Great? Did you find her story fascinating or maybe even inspiring? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos.